Full disclosure, the thumbnail is already a little bit clickbaity. None of the books I read this year are books that are actually on my shelf. Hello everyone, it's Danielle. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be sharing with you all the books that I read in 2020. I'm a newer reader. I didn't really read a lot of books since high school, so it's definitely been a while. I really started reading in August, so from August to December, 22 books. I feel like that's okay. But for this year, 2021, I've set the goal of reading 25 books, you know, just a little bit higher than last year. Let's get started. For the genre of books, I mostly read nonfiction, just kind of putting nonfiction in a category of its own. And then my second most read was contemporary, anything that was kind of like slice of life. And my next most read looks like it was sci-fi. I can think of two off the top of my head that I actually did have to read for one of my humanities classes. The next category is a tie between three categories: thriller, poetry, and fantasy. I think it was two each because classics is just 4.5%, and that is one single classics book that I read. The next category, it's the format of the books that I read. I did mostly consume books as ebooks. That said though, I really do want to read more physical books this year. I didn't make any book purchases last year or anything, so I think that is something I will want to indulge in this year. I wasn't into audiobooks at first, so I was avoiding them, but then lately I have enjoyed listening to audiobooks during my commutes to and from work, so that's probably another medium that I'm gonna explore a little bit more this year. Okay, so for this chart for the author's race, I separated out Filipinos from other Black, Indigenous, people of color to kind of get myself to try to read more Filipino, Filipinx authors this coming year. It looks like 50% of the authors I read were white, which is okay. Like, I think I would definitely want to read more from BIPOC authors this coming year, and definitely more from Filipinx authors. The last category that I measured were authors' genders. So for this, most of the authors that I read were female, fewer of them were male, and then I did read just two books from non-binary or gender non-conforming authors as well. Most of these books I rated 3 stars or above, except for this first book. Yeah, I'm sorry in advance, but my least favorite book of 2020 was America is in the Heart by Carlos Bulosan. I know that's terrible of me. It's kind of hailed as like required reading for Philam folks. So as for the Goodreads summary on this book, it says first published in 1946. This autobiography, which is actually a semi-autobiography because some of the elements are fictional, of the well-known Filipino poet Carlos Bulosan, describes his boyhood in the Philippines and then his immigration into the US. For me, I think this book just didn't really resonate with me because there was definitely some anti-Black sentiment in it. There was also some very like sexist elements in it, objectification of women, stuff like that. I couldn't get into it. I would stream it in the car and I was already like playing it at 2 times speed and just not feeling very engaged. If you've read Catcher of the Rye, it kind of reminded me of that book in the sense that it's just the protagonist kind of wandering around, encountering a lot of people. But I am glad that I read it. Maybe in the future I could give it another chance, but I'm not sure. So the next book on my list is Monstress by Lysley Tenorio. The description on Goodreads, it says, a luminous collection of heartbreaking, vivid, startling, and unique stories set amongst the Filipino-American communities of both California and the Philippines. Really hard in anthologies to like every single story the same amount, so that's why I ended up settling on 3 stars for this one. The next book on my list is Skill with People by Les Giblin. So it was only about like 30 pages long, so it was just really short. It's kind of a guide to just improving your people skills, improving your ability to make strong, lasting impressions on the men and women you meet every day. It was good stuff. I just didn't really retain it or think I learned too much that was new from it. Okay, this next book I read was required reading for my humanities class. This was The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. I actually really did enjoy this book, but it was also a bit depressing. It's about the main character, Gregor. He's kind of like the breadwinner of his family. Then he turns into a giant bug just randomly. The whole book centers on how his family reacts to that. There's a lot of symbolism of how we treat the disabled, how we treat the sick. So yeah, in that sense, I really did enjoy this book. Okay, the next book on my list is Sad Animal Facts by Brooke Barker. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a bunch of sad animal facts. I enjoyed it. It was really cute. The illustrations were really funny. So if you need something to just kind of give you a little pick-me-up, this is a good choice for that. The first one on that list is The Kitchen God's Wife by Amy Tan, who is also the author of The Joy Luck Club. So this is a story between a mother and a daughter. This whole book is detailing the mother's experience in Shanghai in the 1920s. Winnie immigrated to America in 1949. So it's all about that journey, that struggle to, again, immigrate to the US. Yeah, this book was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars. It was a bit of a slow read for me, so that's why I didn't give it the full 5 stars. It took me some time to really get into it. And I think that's just me with period pieces. Again, I am a newer reader, so I think as I read more, these are going to be easier for me to process. Alright, so the next book on here is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Also required reading for my Health Humanities class. This is a post-apocalyptic novel, which is also a movie to my knowledge. Just about a father and a son walking through a desolate America, walking on the road. They're trying to reach this end goal of reaching the coast, reaching water. This book is very focused on us versus them. Everyone they encounter, the little boy, he wants to befriend these people, and the father is just never trusting of anybody. So that was an interesting perspective. After that, it looks like I did rank Parable of the Sower, which is by Octavia Butler. So this contrasts with The Road in the sense that there's a bit more of a hopeful tone, and it's actually taking place in the 2020s. This was published back in 1990s. Some of the elements of this book I feel like Octavia Butler just really predicted, so keep that in mind. I'm not going to spoil anything. Really trying to gather allies. She's trying to not survive on her own. I actually read this as the graphic novel instead of the book, so I'm not sure if there are differences between the two, but it was a great story. I really liked it. So next on this list is actually The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Really kicked off my whole reading journey thus far. However, so I finished this in August, but I want to say I probably started it in January 2019. I really don't know. But this book was really fun. It definitely deserves all the legacy that it has. This was published in the 1970s. It's a sci-fi novel about Earth getting demolished to make way for a galactic freeway. This book is a really fun time if you like British humor, if you like Monty Python humor. I am currently reading the sequel to this book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading more because the characters and the settings are just really fun. Okay, so the next book on my list is called Beyond the Gender Binary, and it's by Alok Vaid-Menon. Part of the Goodreads description here is they show us that gender is a malleable and creative form of expression. The only limit is your imagination. So yeah, I think this is just a really good read, educating yourself on non-binary people. The next book on my list is a poetry collection. It's called Invocation to Daughters by Barbara Jane Reyes. Feminist experimental poetry in the tradition of Audre Lorde and Teresa Hak-Kyung Cha from a prominent Filipino-American poet. A lot of the subject matter was Barbara Jane Reyes' experience being a Filipino-American, raised in the US as well. I think it also had to do with just how she experiences brownness. I am definitely wishing that I had actually saved some of the highlights from this book. I do just remember enjoying it a lot. Alright, the next book I read is called 10 After Closing by Jessica Bayliss. This is a YA novel centering on a boy and a girl trapped in a hostage situation. I really enjoyed it. It's told from alternating perspectives between the two main characters. I really liked the thriller genre in general, so I stayed hooked on the plot while it continued to intensify. Okay, so the next book on my list is called Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End by Atul Gawande. This is a nonfiction book where the author, Dr. Gawande, is tackling the hardest challenge of his profession, how medicine can not only improve life, but also the process of its ending. So I really enjoyed this book. It really draws the distinction between the medical goals of longevity and the medical goal of like improving quality of life, the goals of like geriatricians versus general family practitioners. Yeah, this is really good stuff, especially as a pre-health student myself. Okay, so the next book on here is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. The description here on Goodreads says, promising to be the debut novel of the season, The Silent Patient is a shocking psychological thriller of a woman's act of violence against her husband and of the therapist obsessed with uncovering her motive. It's told from the perspective of the psychotherapist, and he's interviewing this patient. I think she shot her husband 5 times in the face and then hasn't said a word in 6 years. So she's been silent to every psychotherapist thus far. I think with all thrillers, how you feel about the ending will have a huge impact on how you feel about the rest of the book. Maybe I was a little harsh on this book. I think if I reread this book now, I'd probably rate it a little higher. Like for the purposes of this ranking list, I'm actually rating it higher than I had originally. Okay, the next book on this list is called Homie by Danez Smith, which is not actually the title of the book. This is written by a Black non-binary author. The description says, Homie is Danez Smith's magnificent anthem about the saving grace of friendship. Rooted in the loss of one of Smith's close friends, the book comes out of the search for joy and intimacy within a nation where both can seem scarce and getting scarcer. So a lot of the topics of this book include the author's experience of queerness, of blackness, diagnosis with HIV, really powerful poems to read. So the next book on here is The Cancer Journals by Audre Lorde. This was published in the 80s, I believe, a series of journal entries and memoir on Audre Lorde's experience with getting a breast cancer diagnosis and how that affected her sense of womanhood, how that affected her sense of femininity. One topic that especially interested me, kind of being imposed to use a prosthetic breast and not really wanting one for herself. So yeah, I think that this is definitely worth a read if you're curious about the experiences of people with cancer, people with breast cancer in particular. All right, and then my last book for this kind of middle section before we get into my top 5 of the year is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This book was definitely a surprise to me because I wasn't expecting to like a classics novel so much, because there are a lot of Pride and Prejudice memes circulating the internet, so I wanted to be in the know and kind of understand what they were talking about. For a classics novel, this was surprisingly easy to read. Yeah, there was definitely some sentences I had to reread because of like old English and stuff. But yeah, the drama in this book is really spicy, really good. I enjoyed watching the Keira Knightley movie after this book as well. And if you're really into like romance and romance drama, definitely pick up this one. Alright, so we are down to my top 5. Number 5 on my list is In Her Purpose, 40 Principles of Asian Women Redefining Success on Their Own Terms. And this was co-written by Jennifer Redondo-Marquez and Rose Buado, who are both Filipino-American authors. This is the only book that I purchased this past year. It's a collection of short like memoirs from 40 different Asian women. I want to say most of them are Asian American, but I believe there are some that are Canadian or from the UK or otherwise. It's across all avenues of life. So there are like scientists in this book, there are artists in this book, there are athletes. Yeah, so there's definitely something for every woman, not just every Asian woman in this book. Number 4 on my list is Still Alice by Lisa Genova. This book was published, I believe, in the early 2000s, around 2007 or so. Still Alice is a compelling debut novel about a 50-year-old woman's sudden descent into early onset Alzheimer's disease. The author of this book, Lisa Genova, she actually holds a PhD in neuroscience. This book really resonated with me on a personal level. My grandpa did pass away a few years ago, And at the time that he passed away of prostate cancer, but he was also kind of showing early signs of dementia before he passed away. I think that this book was written really powerfully. It's written from the perspective of Alice as she's experiencing Alzheimer's disease. So she eventually starts like repeating herself. She eventually becomes more forgetful. I really like the family aspect of this book. It shows how her family kind of adapts to her and how she adapts to her new reality. She doesn't let this diagnosis ruin her in any way. Okay, coming in at number 3, After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Really touching story about a married couple that takes a year-long separation from their marriage. I think wholesome's the best word for it. It just made my heart really happy. Plus, it was pretty funny at times too. So if you're looking for just a really good, happy read, read this one. It's great. Okay, my number 2 book of 2020 is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. This book was actually published back in 2018, but still relevant as ever. So this book's description on Goodreads is that Ijeoma Oluo offers a hard-hitting but user-friendly examination of race in America, which I thought was a very good way to put it. She really wants readers to feel uncomfortable during this book. She really wants them to challenge the way that they think. It definitely shifts the focus from asking Black people to educate you on white supremacy and racism to asking your fellow non-Black peers to do better and reflecting on yourself to do better. This was a really great book. I also really appreciated that there was a chapter on the Asian model minority myth. And then lastly, my number 1 book of the year is Una Out of Order by Margarita Montemor. The description here says, it's New Year's Eve 1982, and Una Lockhart has her whole life before her. At the stroke of midnight, she will turn 19, and the year ahead promises to be one of consequence. But then what ultimately happens is that Una, instead of turning 19, she wakes up in her 51-year-old body. What we learn is that each year on Una's birthday, she'll, gain 1 year inside, but on the outside, she will be transported to a random year in her adult life. It's I would describe it as like 13 going on 30, as well as like 50 First Dates, Time Traveler's Wife, any of those time travel-ish movies. And this book actually made me tear up a few times. So as opposed to other YA books, which are more about like high schoolers, I really like this book because it was more of Una in her 20-somethings, which I can relate to as a 20-something myself more than I can relate to books about high schoolers now. Another really uplifting read in a similar vein to After I Do. I definitely recommend this one. Those are all the books that I read in 2020. As I said, I will be linking my Goodreads down below if you have any questions or if you want to read the particular reviews and ratings that I left for each of these books. And if you have any recommendations for what I should read in 2021, let me know. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.